There are a vast amount of survival games out there at the moment, but a lot have difficulty setting themselves apart, whether by game mechanics or art style, and that's where Abiotic Factor has got you covered. Hello and welcome, fellow virgins. It is I Super Virgin here, and today I'd like to talk about how Abiotic Factor got my love for survival games back. Now, at first sight of this game, I was already just in love with the way it looked. It has this very much Half-Life 1 vibe to it. The art style is done perfectly to encapsulate this, looking like it's a bit older, but of course showing that the graphics are still very modern and very high. And to add to it, that is exactly the setting of the game. You are part of a research facility that is being overrun by aliens, just like Half-Life. Wonderful idea and executed absolutely perfectly to give you that perfect look. Now, story-wise, you are a scientist at the Cascade Research Facility, which I think is, the equivalent to Black Mesa when you talk about Half-Life. After you get a bit of an introduction in the form of a tutorial where you're actually driven to the research facility and they do a bunch of tests on you and whatnot, so you understand the game mechanics. Everything goes wrong. You don't actually see anything going wrong, so that's a bit of a weird part of the game. You just get thrown into the game and then there's aliens everywhere, so you kind of know what's going on. Plus, if you've already seen a trailer or anything of the game, you know that is pretty much just the premise of the entire game. There's aliens roaming around, just trying to kill everything. There are robots roaming around. There are a bunch of scared survivors. It's a whole heck of a mess. And that brings us to the vast amount of enemies that the game has to offer. Now, it starts relatively easy. You have a small little creature called a pest that jumps towards you and does damage. You have another creature that basically just sticks to a wall or a floor and that just shoots its tongue at you to just grab you, a bit like a barnacle from Half-Life, except instead of pulling you in and killing you, it just hinders your movement because you can't really move anything but closer to the alien. Relatively quickly though, the heavier enemies start coming out. We have a dog-like enemy that charges at you. You have another enemy that shoots stuff at you. I won't tell every single enemy. I won't tell you what all of them are, but there are actually a vast amount of enemies when you go around playing the game, and quickly you get the difficulty higher and higher and higher with the amount of enemies and the different types of enemies. Now, the biggest difference between this game and other survival games is, of course, two different things. One, it's not open world. So pretty much every survival game nowadays has this very big open world game with infinite resources and whatnot. But in this game, you just follow a linear story. Surprisingly enough, that is not really a bad thing. And then two, well, you're inside a facility, so I mean, you guessed it, you can't really chop down trees or mine rocks. You just have to do different things like chopping down desks or mining PCs. Quite literally just taking a bat and just ramming a desk to the ground to get the resources you can get from that, along with other things like filing cabinets, plants, office chairs, all that different stuff, all the materials you can get from that, you also have to use. Like I already stated, the resources in this though are finite, and this isn't a bad thing because it's not like annoying. Sometimes when you need a certain resource, it's a bit more scarce than others, but as you progress through the game, you might find it more. So they're finite, like I said, but it's to a point where you can make a bunch of stuff for 4 people, as it's made for 4-player co-op, but you can't really fuck around too much with the materials. If you just keep making dumb stuff, you'll eventually run out and kind of soft lock yourself. You'll just make the game a lot harder for yourself if you do that. Now, another beautifully done thing that I already kind of mentioned was progress in this game. I have about 15 hours into the game right now. For the vast amount of time, I've pretty much just been exploring. Like, you find new areas, you get new crafting materials, which then give you new crafting ideas, and then because of that, you get to build new things that make you overcome certain hazards you couldn't before overcome, which will then make you progress further into the game. And then, of course, with the survival game, there's also a lot of just, well, surviving and farming. For a vast amount of time, one of my friends was cook of the group, so there is cooking and you actually do have to spend a bit of time there. And when it comes to farming, I think just on average you just run around breaking stuff and you take some resources with you as you would in games like this. But sometimes we all three went around to a certain area and broke down pretty much everything so that we had a really big amount of a lot of the needed resources for pretty much every crafting recipe, and that offered us a pretty neat amount of ability to, you know, craft whatever we wanted to craft. Now, this is an early access game yet, so this isn't fully finished and done. We haven't actually seen everything that these developers have to offer, but in the playtime I've had, in the 15 hours I've had, I don't think I've come across even a single bug. Like, the game plays perfectly. It runs smooth, way too smooth sometimes. I don't think I've ever seen an error come up. I don't think there's any issues with connecting or with fighting or with anything. It's an early access game the way it's supposed to be. Early access. You get access early to the content that's already there. It's not a buggy mess like a lot of different games. Now, looking at the roadmap we have, then they're planning a bunch of updates. I think there's one in the summer, which is, I mean, what, in like a month or two, maybe? I don't know when they'll release that update, of course, but in a few months' time, then they'll plan another update, major update in autumn. So another big update, new sectors, new enemies, new this, new that, just a bunch of extra stuff for everything. And then major update 3, which will be coming in the winter of this year, marks their 1.0 release. So the game will be finished by the end of the year, which is absolutely beautiful to see such decent, or honestly more than decent, progress that these developers plan to make. Now, of course, this is a roadmap, so we don't actually know until they've pushed these updates how far they've gotten into all of this content. But if they're confident with what they've delivered, that they can deliver this in this short amount of time, then I'm pretty sure that we can be sure to have all that content on. All right, to sidetrack a bit on this note, something that early access games really need. A lot of early accesses just end up dying down and never really getting that hype back on the full 1.0 release, just because they just released in early access and it took way too long for them to get further and further into their progress, into their roadmap. And it's sad to see that happen to a lot of games. I know a lot of games that take years to be made. With a game like this, seeing how fast that they might make it, saying like, hey, here's the release, and in about a bit more than half a year, we will actually be releasing the 1.0 update. Beautifully done, but we will have to see, of course. The game has also seen some popularity since its release. I know that I didn't know anything about it. It apparently had a playtest and a demo. I didn't know anything about that, but now we have over 250,000 people actually already buying the game. And on average, there's about 10,000, 11,000 people playing at the same time. Record-breaking, no, but for a very small game that pretty much didn't have a lot of advertising, that is pretty good. And of course, its whopping 96% positive review score helps with that, right? That is a very high score. You will never get 100, but every game that's above 90 is always going to be a very good game. Its price tag helps with this, of course. There's a lot more accessibility to a game that costs 25 euros compared to what other games ask you for 40, 50, or 60 euros. This is definitely a very easy price to ask from somebody, or anybody really. It's not a big amount. And the amount of high quality content that is already there and going to be added later in the near future, I'd say this is a bargain, honestly. So if you do want to buy it, I can't do more than just absolutely recommend it. I am part of that 96% positive review score. I absolutely love this game and what it gives to the player. To give some tips for your first playthrough, I've got 2 tips to say. First, use the in-game voice chat. It is absolutely perfect. It works really well, and it works in such a way that if you move too far away from anyone else, any of your friends, you can't hear them anymore. So that adds a bit of an element of trying to stay together when you're going through these facilities. Honestly, it just adds so much more to the game. Also, when you do use it, your character's mouth moves in game. You have custom characters, which is something I haven't mentioned yet, but with these custom characters that you've made, your mouth actually opens as it would in real life. It looks a bit goofy, but it's definitely adding a lot of funny little elements to the game. And it also adds a little bit to that vibe the game gives. It gives this sort of goofy, but also kind of fun and sometimes serious gameplay. And that is beautiful, I think. Then when you are making a base, because as I said, it is a survival game, base building is always going to be part of this. Make sure that you have a toilet nearby, at least in the early game. Later on in the game, it won't be that big of a deal, but when you're playing a survival game, you have to take care of certain things like food and water and energy. But in this game, you also have to take care of, you know, using the facilities, going to the restroom, that kind of stuff. And so if you don't have a toilet nearby your base, you'll have to run around the facility trying to find the place to actually be able to use the restroom. Gameplay wise, I have to say there's not really that much super special about the game. It's pretty standard stuff. You have skill trees, you have actual customization of your character next to just visual customization, so you can choose what job you had before everything went to shit, and you can choose what skills you have with that. You have a few perks you can choose that are actually permanent for that playthrough, like one where you're less thirsty or you're less hungry. I, for instance, took one where it takes longer for healing effects to really kick in, because who heals in a game? Are you bad at the game or something? Those are added little elements that you probably see in pretty much every survival game, so I'm not really saying, wow, they really reinvented the wheel with that, but these are done really well. They're cool inventions that they've added. Another thing is you don't actually get a crafting recipe as a crafting recipe. You get an idea because, you know, you're a scientist, and then you add certain elements, certain resources to that idea, and then it creates the crafting recipe for you. The problem with this, however, is there's no penalty for combining the wrong things. So it's pretty much a useless mechanic at this moment, but like I said, early access, so we'll see what this gives us, because maybe in the future you might actually get penalties from this, or you might actually have to figure out together with your friends what the crafting recipe for something is, which I think is what they'll eventually want to create out of this, because otherwise this is pretty much just a useless mechanic. But what do you think? Did I convince you to actually check out the game at least, right? Check out the Steam page, or are you not a fan? Are you still not convinced on this game? Let me know down in the comments below, and while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps YouTube push out my content as a smaller channel. So thank you very much if you already are or already have. Anyhow, I hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.